Today's Daf is Daf Memvav in Zbachim from near the top of the page, the second line. Chutz min Adam. What are we talking about? We said a few days ago we learned that you're not chayiv on pigul you're only chayiv on pigul on things which are mutar, become permitted through something else. So, for example, the basar, the meat, gets permitted, ayidei zrika sadam and aktar semurim. In the case of an ola, everything becomes mutar ayidei the dam, right? The dam, meaning mutter to be burnt on the mizbech or mutter to be eaten. But something that's a matter themselves, like komets or the ktoros or the lavona or menchas khan mashiach, that they are not mutter they something else. They themselves are burnt. They themselves are matir something else, or they're offered, but they're not. They themselves are not mutter through something else. They themselves are matim. There's no pigul there. However, yesterday we learned that even though there's no pigul, there is nosar and tame. So, for example, if you eat the komets or the ktoras or the lavona or menchas kohanim, menchas kamashich, if you eat them while you are tame, or when you eat them in a state of nosar, when they are leftovers, call them leftovers. It's leftover to, let's say, to the third day or to the second day, and karbanos are eaten only for a day and a night. So you are chayiv over there, and that's what the Mishnah said yesterday. You're still chayiv nosar and tame, and learned out of psukim, except for dam. Dam you're not chayiv on, neither for nosar or if you're tameh. Meaning dam, there's a special, even though dam, you're not supposed to eat dam. As we learn, in fact, you get kares for eating dam of an animal, dam hanefesh, the animal that's the first blood that comes out, that the what we call the lifeblood. If you eat lifeblood of an animal, you're chayiv kares for that. For if you eat swallowing the dam, let's say of a human blood, that's only an isser drabanan. But there's an isser to eat dam. We know that. However, there's no isser of dam for neither for pigul because it's a matir, nor is there an isser, a nosar and tummy. That's what the Mishnah said. Chutz min dam. That dam, there's no isser of eating. There's an isser of eating dam, but there's no isser of eating dam in a state of tuma or as nosar. You're not chayiv for tuma or nosar or pigul for them. How do we know? Not immediately says thing more. How do we know this from Amar Ula? So Rashi means Ula's not really going on our Gemara. He's not going on our Mishnah. It's really Ula said this in Masechtas Me'ila. We're talking about misusing something of hektish, like what we call sacrilege. So using something of hektish. There Ula says that in terms of talking about Me'ila, it says over there, it says in it says over there, Anina Sat L'cha, actually speaking about dam. I've given you the dam, lachem, Sat L'chem, it's yours. Shalachem, it's yours. And we'll see what it means, Shalachem, that it's yours, that there's no isser of nosar in that case. We'll see how it's learned out. Really, we're speaking about Me'ila. In terms of Me'ila, there's no Me'ila. There's no sacrilege if you eat the dam. There's an isser of eating dam, but there's no isser of Me'ila on that. I've given to you. Lachem, it's like yours. Lachem, it's like chulin, it's like yours. Divrei b'shmol, Tana rather. He says a different pasuk, different in the same pasuk. Amar says lachaper. I've given it to you for atonement. Lachaper says la mila. I'm only giving to you atone for you, but there's no isser mila. And as he learns out that there's no isser mila from the word lachaper. Now we'll see. Lachem is also teaching you that it's yours and there's no mila there. But we'll see the three psukim, the three words here that being discussed are all used. Rabbi Yochanan Amar the pasuk says who. Inside lachem, who who lifnei kapara kalachar kapara. It stays. Who it means it stays static the whole time. Lifnei kapara, even before you sprinkle the dam, before you had an atonement, it's like achar kapara. Machar kapara ein b'mila. After kapara, there's no milas. We'll see that nothing. There's no item in the base of Mikdash whose function is performed. And there's still me'ila there. Once its function is performed, there's no more me'ila. So the who teaching me just like after kapara, there's no me'ila. Before kapara, there's also no me'ila. Ema. So wait a minute. Who says learn it that way? Ema lach kapara kalafim. Why don't you say after kapara, it's like lefnei kapara. Dam is not something that should be eaten. So malafnei kapara yesh me'ila. Just like before kapara, before you did the atonement, you moel in the dam. So the same thing after kapara. There also should be me'ila on the dam. You have a general rule that in almost all cases, we'll see a few exceptions, that in almost all cases, the general rule is there's no such thing as something whose function or whose mitzvah has been performed, and there's still me'ila there. Once you finish the function, there's no me'ila there.
It's an example of a me'ila.
So we'll see. Me'ila would be eating it. Eating dam. Is there me'ila there? If I eat dam, if somehow I found that there's some medicinal value in eating dam. Okay, so is it also to eat dam because you can't eat dam? But is there an issue of sacrilege too? Am I committing sacrilege? So he says, no, you're not committing sacrilege there. Why? Because just like after you sprinkle the dam, if there's any dam left over, there's no sacrilege on that. So before also not. Maybe the other way around. Maybe just like before you sprinkle the dam, there's sacrilege on it. That's me'ila. Maybe afterwards too. The answer is no. Once you've done it already, there's no me'ila. Once the function has been performed. So yeah, I had enough from it. Yeah, I used it. I used it I use it as a salve, or I sprinkle in my fertilizer. Use it for that. Whatever you want to use it for, exactly. So you use it for something, right? So fertilizer would be a good example of using it without drinking it, right? Dam you can't drink, you can't eat dam. That's a special isser. But is there an isser in misusing it, sacrilege? So he says no. Why? Because it says who. So it's always the same before and after kapara. Now after kapara, there can't be any sacrilege because you're finished already. You've finished using it. So therefore, the fake kapara also not. So we have three psukim, or three words over here from the same pasuk, basically. And it says who. So all these things teach us that there is no, as we'll see, it's all referring to me'ila there. There's no me'ila there. But we'll see it's also used, one word is used for Mila, one is used for Nosa, one uses for Tome, that all those things don't apply. But the Gemara asks a basic question, what do you mean? Once something is used, there can't be any sacrilege, below or a Trumas Hadeshin. Trumas Hadeshin in the morning, the first job in the morning is that the Kohen who wins the lottery to do that, he goes up to the top of the Mizbeach, takes a few ashes, takes a spoonful of ashes from the Mizbeach, and he puts them down on the Kevish, and they stay there, you can't have enough. Now, it says, V'samo Sham. Right? So here's an example of Tumas Hadeshin. Tumas Hadeshin is something where it's finished already, it's burnt up its ashes, and you still can't have enough from it. The answer is because there's two exceptions to Tumas Hadeshin and Big Day Kunish takes a monk. There are two exceptions. When there's one exception, you might say it's not an exception. Maybe you learn from that to all other cases. When there's two exceptions, why did it tell you two? That's the idea that Shnei Dvarim, Shnei Ksum Bank Echad, Ein Melamdin. And here we have two exceptions, Trumas Hadeshin and Big Day Kuna. The special four white begodim that the Kohen Gadol wears inside the Kodesh Kodeshim on Yom Kippur. After Yom Kippur, those things are put aside. It says V'hini Chamsham, and you can't use them anymore. So you have two items, Trumas Hadeshin and Big Day Kuna, something which, even though their function has been performed, you still can't have enough from them. So you can't teach. If it says it twice, you can't learn out from there. That tells you that once something's function has been finished, you could use it. So with dam, once it's been sprinkled already, it has no more purpose. There's no sacrilege there. And who teaches me, just like after the atonement, there's no sacrilege, before atonement also there's no sacrilege. So that's fine if you say that by the Kohen Gadol, whose four begotten that he used in Lefnai V'Tim, he takes them off. And he leaves them there, Malamid Shatun and Geniza, you have to store them, you can't use them anymore, even though their function has been used already, their function has been performed. El Rav Dosadamar Mutara saying the Kohen Gadol, he just says the Kohen Gadol can't use it anymore next Yom Kippur, but they are the regular four begotten that the Kohen Hedyon wears all year round. So he can use them. You can't use them for another Yom Kippur. So therefore, V'hini Chamsham does not teach me that they can never be used again. Rather, they could be used. So once the function has been performed, there's no more sacrilege. This pasuk is not teaching me that something that even though it's been used already must never be used again. You can't have enough from it. It's not teaching me that, because any chamsham does not mean that you have to leave it there forever and that they have to be stored away, but rather that the Kohen Gadol shouldn't use it again. So so we only have one limit. The limit of what? Of Trumas Hadeshin, something which its function has been performed already, and yet you can't have enough from it. So maybe you should learn from there to all over. No, the answer from Trumas Hadeshin for Egel Rufa, once you break the animal's neck, right, and you perform the whole perform, you can't have enough from it, right? It says you have to leave it there. That's fine if you hold that if the two psukim teach you the same thing, they're coming to exclude all other cases. So therefore, in our case, in the case of dam, since this function has been performed, obviously there's no mila there. And who teaches me just like there's no mila after the function is performed, same thing before. There is a shita who holds that what? That only have a 3 psukim Michael. But the answer is right. I don't have 3 psukim, but I have Trey Miyute. In both these cases, both by Egla Rufa and by the Big Day Kohen Gadol after Yom Kippur, there's a special miyut in the pasuk. Harufa means this one, this particular one. And what does that mean? Rashi said, Egla Rufa, Sivar Fusham, V'hai Sham Kroyaseru. Harufa, this one is rufa, nothing else has that rule. This one has to be put aside, nothing else. In the case of the big Dikon, it says v'samo, could have just said v'sam. What's v'samo? This you have to store away, but nothing else. So these are miyutim. Only these things are only these items are special items that once they've been used can never be used again. Right, but most other thing, in other words, it would be considered misuse or sacrilege to use them again. But anything else like dam, once it's been used, doesn't have to. There's no isra in using it again. So therefore, we come back, going back to the beginning. We had 3 limudim from the same pasuk. V'tlosa kroi b'dam lo. We want to read 3 psukim by dam. Right? We asked a question over here. Ula, like Rashi explained for us, really speaking about meila. So why are we speaking? Why do we need 3 psukim to teach me that there's no meila when it comes to dam? After all, we have Rabbi Yochanan and Tanur Rabbi Shmuel and Ula. Right? They're all basically saying the same thing. The psukim teach me that there's no when it comes to dam, there's no isser. What do we need 3 psukim? Tell me b'dam if they're all for meila. So the answer is the Shita's gears is a little bit clearer. The little gimel by the Shita, one to come to tell me that there's no isser of noser. If the dam was left over, there's no isser of noser. Obviously, you can't drink it, but there's no isser of noser if you drank it or used it, right? Or one to exclude from tumah if you ate it while you were tummy. One to exclude from mila. There's no mila. Let's say even if you want to use it for fertilizer, where you're not eating it, it's still there's no isser of mila there. That's what the Gemara says. And the girsa of Shita is better because the way Rashi also apparently had that girsa, because Rashi, a few lines from the bottom of the page, says the first one, 5 lines from the bottom of the page. What do you need for it? Lemute noser lachem. I'm reading Rashi now, 5 lines from the bottom page in Rashi. Lachem kashar chulin v'lo kachim. Right, to tell me that it's yours. It's not. It's like chulin. And it's not like kachim. There's an isser of nosar. The second was a kapara. It's only given for kapara and not for anything else. But for anything else, it's like chulin. Therefore, there's no isser of tumah. Like we said before, who teaches me there's no mila? Just like there's no mila after the zrikas dam, there's no mila before the zrikas adam. Right? Avol pigul. What about pigul? Is there an isser pigul? No, you don't need a puzzle because we had that claw before. That time anything which is mutra something else like the meat or the emurim, there is pigul there. The dam gufe materhu. The dam itself is a mater, and therefore we don't need a special puzzle. That's the same lima that we had in the previous Mishnah, not this Mishnah, but the Mishnah back on the bottom of Mem Beis Amid Beis. That started over there. That's the Mishnah teaching me there's a pigul. So therefore, when it comes to dam, there's no isser of, not only is there no isser of pigul on the dam, because it's a mater, but there's no isser of eating it while you're tummy, there's no isser of nosar, and there's no isser of me'ila there. Amar Rabbi Yochanan, last line on the page of Gemara, Shlosha creases for Shlom Lamali. It says 3 times by Shlomim, it says creases, it's a lashon of kares, right? If you, let's say, ate it with pigul or whatever, right? What's the reason for why it says kares 3 times? Achas l'kal v'achas l'prat. And Rashi explains this is a klal l'prat in the sense that kol davar she'er b'chlal v'yotzim l'klal, and explained. In other words, this is included in all kachim. Why did it tell me the isser of shlomim? Right? So just like shlom is kachim is be'ach, not kachim bedek bias. And then if you eat that while you're tameh, you get kares for that. The same thing, all kachim. That says once to tell me the klal l'prat that there is a general rule of kachim and the prat of shlomim. To tell me that, like Rashi says, "V'lo shlom mechal kol kachim mayu." Lama yatsa. Why did it tell me? Teach me. Sheik tishim neisov v'tumaso love kol kachim mechal. Lama yatsa. To teach me that just like shlomim is kachim is beach, and if you ate it in a state of tumah, you're chayev. Kares the same thing. All other kachim is beach. V'achzot varm she'en necholim. And one to tell me that you're chayev if you ate it in a state of tumah, even things which aren't eaten. Again, look at the Mishnah, our Mishnah Memhamad days. We said things which are in chayiv pigol, you still chayiv shem nasar tam shem mishum tamei chus min adam. We've explained dam and amar aleph, right? Now, Rav Shimon says you're only chayiv on things which are normally eaten. But let's say you ate the wood or the frankincense or the ktoras, however you ate them, if you ate them, those are not normally eaten. And therefore, Rav Shimon says you're not chayiv if you ate them in a state of tumah. But the Rabbanan don't agree. That's Rav Shimon's shita. Rabbanan say anything you ate while you're tamei, you are chayiv on, right? Even if there's no chayiv of pigel because it's a matir, you're chayiv for eating in a state of tumah, right? Not dam, but other things, other parts of the offering. You're chayiv, and those are in tamei. Rav Shimon says if it's something which isn't normally eaten, you are chayiv. But the Chacham say if something you're not normally eaten, you're not chayiv. Chacham say you are chayiv. So the Gemara now says va'achas ledvarim back on the top of Mem Vav Amid Beis, va'achas ledvarim she'en echalin, that you're chayiv there too. You got chayiv there because Rav Shimon the Amid Varim she'en chayiv she'en echalin enchem shem tumah. Rav Shimon says what things that aren't eaten you're not chayiv for tumah. Things that aren't normally eaten. What is it? What does the third kares teach me? That it says by shlam l'sui my l'sui chatos apanim, to tell me that if you ate any of the inner karbanos, which aren't eaten anyway, they're totally burnt, but if you ate them, you're also chayiv kares there too. So why would you think otherwise? If you're chayiv if you're chayiv for eating, let's say shlamim or chatas that are on the outer mizbeach or ola or asham, if you ate them in a state of tum, you're chayiv kares. Why would you think that if you ate a carbon which is more holy, so to speak, it's totally burnt, chatos apnimis, which are all burnt? Why would I think that I wouldn't be chayiv if I ate in a state of tumah? I think Rav Shimon. Rav Shimon himself said, we're talking about Rav Shimon. According to Rav Shimon, it says that things which are not normally eaten, you're not chayiv shem tumah, but you are chayiv on chatos apnimis, which is meat, which is not. You don't normally eat this carbon, but the meat of this carbon, the meat is normally eaten. Since Rav Shimon says, remember Rav Shimon's sheet that we had a few mishnayos ago said that Rav Shimon said that there's only pigel on outer karbonis, not on inner karbonis. So I might think mishum tumanam shouldn't be chayiv tumel kamashma you are chayiv. So Shimon says there's no on an inner carbon, which you're not supposed to eat anyway. But if you ate it, you're not chayiv pigel. But if you ate it while in a state of tumah, you are chayiv for eating in a state of tumah. That's why this says 3 times krisus by shlomim. One to tell me the first two klal and prat to teach me davar sheyasam klal, right? That it's a klal and this is a prat. We have the klal and prat. And one to teach me, and the third one is to teach me that you're according to Rav Shimon that you're chayiv for eating a chatos apnimi, which normally we would say, right? The Chacham would say anyway you're chayiv pigel. It's a davar pashit. You'd be chayiv for tumah on an inner carbon. But Rav Shimon who holds that you're not chayiv on pigel on an inner carbon, you might think that he holds that there's no tumah there either. Kamash Malon, that's what he uses the third pasuk for. Numi Rav Shimon Mechayiv. Now in Mishnah we didn't have the word Numi, but some have that girsa. Rav Shimon says you're chayiv only on things which are normally eaten, but excluding, let's say, wood, ate some levona Torahs. Those are not normally eaten. Therefore, you wouldn't be chayiv for eating them in a state of tumah, right? In a state of tumah or noser for that matter, because we're saying where the Mishnah says things which are not letting me chayiv on pigol because they are themselves matir and they're not mutar, they're something else. You're chayiv shemil from tumah except for dam. Rav Shimon says you're only chayiv noser and tumah on things which are normally eaten, not on things which are not normally eaten. Itmar, we have 2 sets of rabbis. Rabbi Yochanan Rish Lakish, that's one pair of rabbis, and we have Rabbi Lazar of Rabbi Yosef B'Chanina, another pair of rabbis. One rabbi from the first pair, Chad Mehai Zuzah, V'Chad Mehai Zuzah, one from one pair and one from the other pair of one from they say Chadam Machlokes B'Tumas Basar. One of these 2 rabbis, one of one pair and one of the other pair. Chad Omer Machlokes B'Tumas Basar. The machlok between Rav Shimon and the Rabbanan, whether you're chayiv on eating something which is not normally eaten, is only if the meat was tamei, not you. The meat was eaten as he's talking about. But if you yourself are tamei and you ate something which is not normally eaten, you don't get malchus over there. V'chad Omar, and the other said no. Machlok is the same machlok, whether the meat is tamei, or in this case the ktoras or the levona is tamei, or whether you're tamei. The machlokas applies in both. In other words, Rav Shimon says that you're potter in both cases, and the Rabbanan say you're chayiv in both cases. You get malchus. My timer. What's the reason? Keeping the queen about basar shiga b'chol tamei. The pasuk that says a basar shiga b'chol tamei means if the basar became tamei, the previous pasuk talked about the tumas olav. If you eat it while you are tamei, the person is tamei. So since you call that basar shiga b'chol tamei, right? That the Isser applies there. The Rabbanan say you're chayiv there, and Rab Shimon says you're only chayiv and davar says normally eaten. Karina Bevit Masa Olav. In other words, the same thing applies. The machlok between Rab Shimon and the Rabbanan applies whether the meat or the item that you're eating. I shouldn't say the meat. It's the eitzim levonic Torahs. The Rab Shimon says you're potter on. The Chum say you're chayiv on whether the item was tamei or whether the person was tamei. Rav Yomi masni hachi. That's how Rav Yomi learns the machlok. Rav Kana masni hachi. Chad me'agez zuzah, v'chad me'azuzah, or zuga, same thing. It's one of each pair. It's going on the sefer, specifically on Rab Shimon saying that it's mutter. The machlokes is betumas. The person was tamei. The Rab Shimon says you're potter, and the Chum say you're chayav. Betumas basar tivya koloka. If the basar is tamei, everybody agrees you're tamei. That's what one pair of rabbis, one from each pair, said. The Chad Omar, right, of those two rabbis, one from each pair, one said the machlokes is only where by tumas aguf, by tumas basar, everybody agrees you get malchus. The Chad Omar machlokes is the same machlokes whether it's the basar was tamei or whether the item or whether the coin was tamei. Amar Mastavra commander machlokes Mastavra, the machlokes applies in both cases, whether the item was tamei or the person was tamei. My time kim lo kriim et masolav b'nichrasa. Right, since it's not called v'tumasa olav b'nichrasa, because if he's not tamei, doesn't count. In other words, if it doesn't apply in one case, it doesn't apply in the other case. And as Rav Shimon says that you're not chayiv on something which is not normally eaten, even though you're tamei, it probably doesn't apply if the item was tamei as well. We learn right? We learned that basar teach me eitzim levona are also usher apparently once they are tamei. The answer because there's a basar she'igav chol tamei. The answer to the pasuk it's only in this rabbanan that it's an asmachta on the pasuk based on a basar she'igav chol tamei, including eitzim levona, that they are puzzle if they became tamei. But it doesn't mean that if a person ate them while they were tamei that he would be chayav. Says this Mishnah, we refer to this Mishnah back on Daf Beis. L'shem shisha dvar mazevach nizbach. The carbon is for the purpose, is shechted and is offered with shchit kabalachas rika for 6 different things. One is the nizbach. It's slaughtered for 5 different things. When we say slaughter, we'll talk about means the whole avoda. L'shem zevach. Number 1, it's got to be for the right carbon. If you had a kavana for the wrong carbon, you shechted an olah, let's say l'shem shlamim. So even though we said the carbon is kosher, but the bomb's not yotzei, so it's got to be. Now Lapugarash says you can't have in mind for a different carbon. The Shem Zebech, it has to be for the person who's bringing it, the owner. Now we learned before, Tosas back on the base said that the only time that it ruins if the owner's by the zrika, because that's when you have to have kavanah for the owner. But in any case, all these at least these first 2, if you didn't have the kavanah in the right way, the guy is not yotzei. If it's a chatos or a pesach, and you did it for a different kavanah, the carbon is puzzle. But you're not yotzei unless the kavanah was for the right carbon and for the right owner. It says l'shem zeh l'shem Hashem. It has to be for God. You have to bring it for God's purpose. L'shem ishim, that it should be burnt on the mizbech, as we'll see, excluding like just barbecuing it. L'shem reach, it's got to have a good smell. Meaning you can't, as we'll see, you can't roast it first and then offer it on the mizbech because then it doesn't smell. Right? If you never made a barbecue, when you take raw meat and you barbecue it, then it's got that good smell. If you take it out the next day after you barbecued it on Sunday and you barbecued it on Monday, it doesn't have that smell. L'shem yichach should be pleasing to God. The chatzas v'osham l'shem chet. It's got to be for the chatzas. It has the purpose for the right sin. Amar Rabbi Yossi, af mishalo yabalibo l'shem echem. Even if you didn't have the right kavanah, kosher, it's still kosher. Shoot tanai bezin she'ein machshavos. In other words, it's tanai bezin actually that you shouldn't have a kavanah, because we're afraid if you say, when a kavanah Rashi has said, that means you set out those words. So you're afraid if you say l'shem this, you might say shalom l'shem that. So it's better, it's a tanai bezin, that it's automatic. The person offering the coin, offering the carbon, shouldn't say anything, because if he doesn't say anything, stam is okay. He said, but if he says something, he might say the wrong thing. So af mishal yibalibo l'shem echem kolei let's kosher shoot tanai bezin. Now you could some have the gives of ve'ein machshava, but he could say that she'ein machshava lechas el charavoid mean it goes according to the person doing the avoda, the person offering the carbon. Meaning that usually it would be the kohen. I mean, a zor can do the shchita, but all the avodas have to be done by a kohen. So the machshava goes according to him. Meaning, if he had a bad machshava Even if the owner had a good machshava, let's say the owner standing on the outside, the Israeli saying, "Oh, my carbon's being brought. Look, I have binoculars. I can see the Kohen doing it and all that. He's doing it, and I have a good kavanah." But if the Kohen had a bad kavanah, it doesn't help. That's right. So last Rashi in the Mishnah, right before the lines get wide, he'll go, "You have a shalol lishmo." If he had a kavanah shalol lishmo, I'll the balam lishmo lav midu. The lav midu telling us it doesn't depend on the owner. There's a makaros of the person bringing it. Now we'll see. He learns a makaros that's going on the person actually doing the offering. So you have to have all those kavanas. Now, Rashi said the Mefarshim say that you have to have these 6 kavanas, or stam is also good. The way Rabbi Yossi said in our Mishnah, right? Rabbi Yossi, Tosfos says back in the base that those machshavas are all talking about the first 2. Kolos machshavas shenemru kan puts milashem l'shem zvayach. If you had a chamashma, they're still kosher in your yotzei. Why? Because it's learned out from kiamakor l'chol elu is from what? Is from the Aktorah. Is Mi'akos Baktorah Seimurim, and the Aktorah Seimurim is not really Ma'akiv. So it's really only, he says, of the first 2. Other Rishonim disagree and say that if you had a bad kavanah and any of these 6 things, that would ruin the carbon and you wouldn't be yotzei. Okay, Amar Rav Yehuda in the Gemara, right after the Mishnah. Amar Rav Yehuda Amar Rav. Ola l'shem ola. If when you bring an ola, it has to be l'shem ola. Puka l'shem shlamim. Delo. If you had a kavanah l'shem shlamim, you're not yotzei. Remember, in the case of ola, the carbon is not puzzle, but you're not yotzei. Isham l'shem ish's got to be from lapuka kavava. You shouldn't have a kavanah that say to roast it like a barbecue. Have kavanah to offer to burn on the mizbeach. Delo. In other words, if you had a kavanah just to roast it and you're cooking meat, that's no good. Reach l'shem reach for a smell. Lapuka evarim shetzolen. Behelen, Delo, that wouldn't work. As I said before, if you first roasted the meat and then you put on this be'ach, you're not yosei. You didn't have a reich there. There's no reich there. Nichoach l'shem hanachas ruach. That's kavanah to have pleasing to God. L'shem misham arbayom. You have to do it l'shem Hashem to give it to the purpose of God and for no other purpose. So you have to have these 6 kavanas. But again, kavana means you have to say it out, so it's better not to say anything. As a t'nai best, and those are your standard 6 kavanas. And if you had no kavana at all, that's also good because that's the Chacham said that's standard. And therefore, even if the Kohen didn't think about it, he just gave it stam. He gave it stam, but he knew he's bringing a carbon. But if he didn't have these 6 kavanas, these kavanas specifically, it's a t'nai best that it works. The Chacham said, don't say anything. Better not to say anything than to say the wrong thing. I'm going to meet a Rav in the second of the Y lines of the Gemara. Let's say I brought a Chatz Shemola, that's possible. We learned that back on Daf Beis. But l'shem chulin ksheira. But if I brought l'shem chulin for a non-sacred carbon at all, that's okay. Amar blows my time at a Rav and says, "V'lo yichalu es kachim b'nei Yisrael." You shouldn't profane the kachim b'nei Yisrael. Kachim machalin kachim. Again, lo yichalu, they shouldn't. A kachim can mechal nashim and chulin mechal kachim. So if you had a kavanah for chulin, it's okay. That's the interesting thing. Chatz Shem Ola. That if you did L'shem Ola, so L'shem chulin ksheira. Maser Rabba, so it's kosher. Maser Rabba. Amar Rav Yossi Apmi Shalei L'shem Echa. Even if kavanah for one of these things we said in the Mishnah, kosher shoot tonight bezdin. Time Shalei believe because you didn't make kavanah at all. You had no kavanah for these things. Okay. Ha you believe L'shem chutz mashma if you have chulin would be puzzled. If he had no kavanah at all of these 6 things, he wasn't thinking at all. He was just, doing it by rote, whatever. He says, I know I'm bringing a carbon, but I'm not thinking about those things. Then it's kosher, and the balam is yotzei. It's maratza for him. But if he had the same chulin, maybe kosher and maratza. So when Rabbi Yehuda said, that's possible. That we all agree. The same chulin is kosher. What's the reason? Because it says lo yichalu. Only one kachim could be machal, another one if he had a kavanah, but a kavanah a chulu wouldn't work. What do you mean? It's time because he didn't have any kavanah at all. It's mashma if he had a bad kavanah l'shem chulin would be possible. He says no. Maybe l'shem chulin it's kosher, but he's not yotzei. It's not maratza for him. He doesn't appease God with that.
The person who's bringing the korban.
The person is bringing the carbon.
The Kohen is doing all these.
We're talking about the Kohen. We're talking about not the owner. We're talking about the Kohen. If the Kohen had a bad kavanah, we're going to see another opinion on tomorrow's daf that even if the owner had a bad kavanah, that would ruin it too. But according to what we're saying now, it goes according to the Kohen. If the owner had a kavanah of pigel and the Kohen had a good kavanah, it's good. If the Kohen had a kavanah of pigel and the owner had a good kavanah, you go according to the Kohen. That's what we're saying now.
But here we're saying belibo, and with pigel you have to articulate it.
Here, and again, it says, he means also, according to Rashi said before that any machshava by kachim means you spoke it out, you said it out. Then to say how many people heard him, but he had to say it. Here, believer means in his heart, but he spoke it out. Amar Belazar. Listen carefully. Is kosher. Kshera. That's what Rabbi Rav said. If you shech l'shem chulin, it's kosher. Kosher doesn't mean that your baal is yotze, but it's kosher. Mishum chulin, but if he thought it was chulin, he didn't even realize he was in a carbon. He was totally, took some drugs that morning and he was confused and he thought he's just shechting it for a barbecue. He didn't even think about that it's kachim. Then it's psula. Like Shmuel asked Shuna, why? What does masasik? Means I'm occupied with one thing and brought something else. Remember, if I cut something off, if I cut off a leaf on Shabbos, I didn't know it was Shabbos. Okay, so I did a malacha b'shogeg. But let's say I was misasek. I thought that the leaf was already detached and I picked it up. That's called misasek. That's another Shabbos. So misal l'kachim shu puzzle. It's puzzle. In other words, it's one thing I didn't have the right kavanas. I wasn't thinking about God. I wasn't thinking about this, but I knew what I was doing. I'm bringing a carbon. But if I wasn't even thinking about a carbon, it's puzzle. It's got to be for the ben buck. It's got to be for this carbon. In other words, Shmuel asks Kasha Rafuna, what's halacha minayim nesasi? So he told him this pasuk shachas ben Hashem. He says, I know the basic idea. Remember, by Kachim, we always have to have a rule. It's got to be said twice. Got to be repeated that if you didn't do it, that it's indispensable and it wouldn't work. It says you should shecht it according to your will. That means with your knowledge. You have to know what you're doing. You have to know you're doing a carbon. Maybe you weren't thinking about the owner. Maybe you weren't thinking about which carbon it was, but you had to have a kavanah that you're bringing a carbon. So this is back to your kasha, Moshe. Whose kavanah are we talking about? The processor, we'll call him the processor or the owner, right? So our mission, we said, it goes according to the processor. Masis Lokaitan doesn't go like the Fontan. It's Tanya Rav Lazar Rav Yossi. Shamati Shabalam Afagan. I heard that the Balam, the owner, not the processor, but the owner could also make a pigel. That's what Rav Lazar Rav Yossi said. Amarava, so Amarava, what's his reason? My time Rav Lazar, Rav Yossi Namar Kappas says, Vehikir Vamakiv, and Rashi adds on, Vehikir Vamakiv Karbano, the pasuk says in pasuk Yudches of Perik Zion in Vayikra. It says Makiv Karbano, his carbon. In other words, the pasuk Shad Hikir Makiv, the our Mishnah held Makiv is the processor, the Kohen. Here he says that the Rav Lazar Yossi holds Mikra Makiv Karbano, speaking about the Makiv who's the owner is bringing it. It's a question how you interpret the pasuk. Amar Abai says, and you have this many times in Shas, usually Abai says it. Rav Lazar Rav Yossi, this sheet Rav Lazar Rav Yossi, he says what? That it goes according to somebody else's machshava, the owners, not the processor. Rav Eliezer, another rabbi, Rav Shimon ben Elazar, a third rabbi, they all hold that if the oved, the processor is one person, and the person who's thinking about it, right, might say it, is another person, it's effective. In other words, the owner's bad machshava can ruin the carbon that the Kohen is doing there. Rav Lazar B'Yossi Haram, we just said that. Rav Lazar B'Yossi says not only if the Kohen had a bad machshava, but even if the owner had a bad machshava, that ruins it. Rav Lazar D'Tznan, let's say you shecht an animal, just shchita for a guy. You're doing shchita. The guy also, an Arab comes over to you. Well, I don't know about an Arab because that's not really about a czar, but let's say an Arab who wants to eat kosher, he says, could you shecht this animal for me? Right? Shchitas Akshay says the Kamra Blazer says it's possible. Why? Why? Because a guy is an ovikachavim is tam machshav is that he's shechting it for the avodah zara, for his God. So that means that even though you didn't have that kavanah, but the owner had that kavanah, that ruins it. So Yisur Blazer also holds this idea that not the processor but the owner can also ruin it. Shimon Elazar, it's not. Call him Shimon Elazar. Kol shein kashel etzniya. On Shabbos, you have to pick for carrying. You have to carry something that's chashuv, right? It's got to be a certain amount of whatever the item was. Let's say it's not something that people would store. They wouldn't even keep it. It's so little, minute, or minuscule, or not important that that a person normally wouldn't do it. Wouldn't normally store that. They matzil and metzin kamo, and people don't store the weight. But even an item like that, the huchshel is there. But let's say this person, this Michigana, wanted to keep it. I wanted to keep this little speck of this little item. Vitsni, and he put it away, and somebody else came and carried it away, even though most normal people wouldn't store that. They wouldn't consider chashiv. It's totally unimportant. But since the owner considered it important, the person who carried it out, even though he's not chashiv, I mean, he might have done it unintentionally. He didn't know that the other guy stored it away, whatever. He didn't know what it was. He didn't realize how insignificant it was. But because the owner considered it significant, the person who carried out is chayiv. So you see all these three hold that it goes by not by the processor, but by the owner. Tarvayu is Rabbi Yossi. The last two certainly hold Rabbi Yossi. Hashta b'chutz, if they say b'chutz, whether it's on Shabbos or shechting a regular animal for a goy, Manach over there, they hold that the machshava of the owner is effective. If you say that a machshava outside the base of Mikdash is effective, a machshava of the non-processor, certainly in the base of Mikdash, where the Torah says a machshava is important, like we learn out pigul, right? What is pigul? If you have bad machshava, that ruins it, right? So the machshava. Rabbi Yossi, less l'tavai, but the Rabbi Yossi who says this by karbanos, that a bad machshava of the owner ruins it, even though the processor didn't have that bad machshava, so he doesn't have to hold of them. Dilma b'fnim, hudaminan, and only in the base of Mikdash, where the Torah says machshava is important, that it counts. There, b'chutz l'ormin, outside, you don't say that. Shimon Elazar, Islay to Rabbi Elazar. Shimon Elazar, who was he? He was the last one who said it by Shabbos. He also Rabbi Elazar, hasta b'Shabbos orminan, b'avoda b'askam, miboyavas chavim, which is similar. Why? To bring in the base of Mikdash, because if you did any of us in a similar way that we bring karbanos in the base of Mikdash, you're over for that. So by Shabbos, which is b'chlal, nothing to do with the base of Mikdash, nothing to do with the carbon. If over there you say that the owner's machshava affects the processor, certainly by Avos Klavim. But Rabbi Lezer, less than Rabbi Shimon Elazar, but he doesn't hold of the one of Rabbi Shimon Elazar who set up by Shabbos. The Maros Kachavim who damrein came pnim. Maros Kachavim, there he say, because there he has halacha like something brought inside the base of Mikdash regular carbon, because we learned that if you bring Avos Klavim, even though it's not the normal way to serve the idol that way, but if you do something that's done in the base of Mikdash, you're chayiv for avodah zarah. Aval Shabbos, when it comes to Shabbos, the Torah says only machshava Shabbos. So you had to think about what you're doing. You had kavanah for this avodah. You forgot maybe that it was Shabbos, or you thought that this malacha was mutter. But it's got to, you had a machshava, you learn it from Mishkan, it's got to be a machshava zechah shemenu bein miskam she'ein shir zechah shemenu bein miskam lacha. In other words, you have to machshava. So the first one, our rabbi wouldn't necessarily hold to the other ones by avodah zarah, by shechting for a goy, or by Shabbos. But the one who holds by Shabbos, he certainly holds to the other way up. All right, Hanlach Beis Shammai, we'll start to do parak tomorrow. Have a good day, everybody. Kol tov.